Okay, so let me do a little bit of storytelling here. I'm just going to share my screen. We're just talking about bounce waves, and I'll come back to this later on today. But right now I want to tell a story, and I first want to honor all of the incredible people. Some of them are here, but there's others as well. But these are just the ones that I've put together in this collage. I mentioned Kaimana. He's the one with me by the photograph of the stars, the galaxy behind us. That was a second trip to Hawaii, and we're in Hilo. We're actually at the planetarium at the university in Hilo, and Kaimana had one of his students available, on one of his navigation students who was apprenticing with him, and she took us on a accelerated voyage from Hawaii to Tahiti and showed over those 35 days how the night sky is both consistent and also shifting and changing, and how you use your fingers, your hand, your parts of your body with the stars, with the boat. And so Kaimana spent a couple of hours explaining all of this in this kind of accelerated voyage over, condensing it down to a couple of hours. It was just an amazing experience. The big family photo in the middle, the beautiful smile with the fellow with the black t-shirt is Vid. And this is his family. And spent an afternoon and evening with them at their home and got to know their stories. Vid grew up in a small island called Satawal, which is in the Caroline Islands. And right in the middle of the picture is, between myself and my partner Robin, is a woman who is the daughter of a famous navigator who's up in the top right corner in a yellow t-shirt with a young woman on his shoulder. That's Mau Pialog. And Mau is very famous in Hawaii because he came there in the 70s from this small island in the Caroline Islands. And he is the last of 100 generations of navigators who learned traditionally how to wayfind, and came to Hawaii because there was no one in Hawaii who had this skill, and only a handful of these traditional navigators left. And Mao realized that it wasn't going to happen on his island just with the younger generation. He just couldn't find anyone who was interested or had the gift. And so he responded to an invite from a fellow named Nainoa Thompson, came to Hawaii and then guided the first voyage from Hawaii to Tahiti using traditional methods. Some of the other people in the photo, the bottom with the two women with blue t-shirts, that's Bonnie Kahapia and Linda. They run a navigating school in Oahu where they take young people out, and they do part of their curriculum. I think it's 8 and 9 years old, if I remember right. And they do their math and their geography and their cultural history on the boat. So they're sailing while they're doing their experiential learning. The photograph of Robin and I with a woman in a blue t-shirt between us, that's Kat. She's from Tonga. And living in Hawaii now. Yeah, and then others as well. And one of the captains, Tom, who spent some time with us in a place called Sand Island, which is where 2 of the catamarans were getting retrofitted. We got a chance to spend some time on the boat with them and talk and learn. So I just wanted to mention all of these incredible people before I get any further into it. And before I even went to Hawaii, and the reason this all came up was, and I'll tell my story in a moment, but there was a wonderful elder who's not in these photographs named Walter, who was really the one in a Skype call who really opened up and then created all the opportunities that are still opening up for me. And Walter was amazing, knew all of these people. There was all these connections to Walter. So he was really the one. But he wanted to, we talked for a couple of hours. He really wanted to understand my heart. He wanted to understand why I wanted to come to Hawaii, what it is I wanted to learn. And at the end of the call, he said, I get you. I get why you're coming, and I'll open up every door I can for you. So I do want to acknowledge Walter as well, even though I don't have his photograph up here. So let me tell you my story. And then I'll tell you the big story. So my smaller story is I love sailing. I've got a friend, John, who's got a wonderful 50-foot Beneteau he keeps near Vancouver, and we go off as often as we can. And love being with him on the boat. It was about 8 years ago now that we were sailing, and John challenged me because he said, you know, you're spending too much time looking into the navigation equipment and focused on the screen. And it was a tricky place that I was piloting, where there's a lot of reefs, and we were coming in, you know, we weren't far offshore, and so I was just really paying attention to what was going on. And John said, you got to pick your head up and look around. You know, it's the real world out here, not just this screen. And he called it the glass bubble. He said, you can get lost in the glass bubble when you're on the boat because of all of this technology. That prompted a memory of a conversation I had with a wonderful scientist, anthropologist named Wade Davis, who had come to the university and spent time in Kamloops, and also had done a wonderful set of lectures for CBC for the radio called the Wayfinders. And when I encountered Wade's story and what he was learning with the Polynesian community and going out for sailing experiences with them while he was learning and writing his book and doing his lectures and thinking about culture. Of course, Wade's been all over the world. He just lives north of me up in the Sacred Headwaters, up in northern British Columbia. I love this one quote from Wade here: "The world in which you were born is just one model of reality. Other cultures are not failed attempts at being you. They're unique manifestations of the human spirit." So, and a lot of his work has been about ethnocide, or the death of cultures, the death of language, and trying to help people to understand what we're losing. You know, we talk about biodiversity, there's ethnodiversity, and the need for us to change course for where we're headed with the kind of the losses that are underway, profound losses. So that's why this story captivated Wade. I think it's why it touches a lot of us, because of the way in which this particular manifestation of the human spirit is coming back sort of alive, and all this new learning that's really ancient learning coming back into the modern world. It's really quite a profound story. So here's one more story. And by the way, I don't have a script. I found years ago I just did away with scripts, so I just channel whatever shows up. So you kind of get it, like it's fairly random sometimes. I pity the group sometimes that has to listen to my meandering thought patterns, but because I don't have a nice linear conceptualization of where I'm going, sometimes the slides help at least keep me on task a little bit. But the one story I do want to tell is the story of Kirkridge. So what happened was, I was doing all this learning. I had these experiences with John out on the sailboat. I was thinking a lot about navigation. I got totally hooked into reading about traditional navigation. I got dozens of books. My partner Robin can testify to the fact that I was I was a bit obsessed with learning and reading. And then I went to Kirkridge for the fellowship. And it was there that a wonderful leader named Joanne Cooper and I got in this conversation about the Polynesian voyaging community and what I was learning and what I was excited about. And I'd done a trip to Hawaii, but I hadn't really linked in too much with the community there. But I picked up bits and pieces of things while I was there. And she said, "Well, I teach at the University of Hawaii, right?" So, and I knew that she lived in Honolulu, and she said, "I know people. I know Walter. I know these people you can meet." And so it was Joanne that created all the opening for me to go originally, and linked me in with all the community there. And then Joanne also said, "Hey, come to Hawaii. Come stay with us." And you can do this learning while you come to Oahu, and then you can go to other islands if you meet people. And so that's what it all ended up happening, and been a couple of visits there. And now I've linked in as well with I was doing a program on Cortez Island at a wonderful retreat center leadership institute called Hollyhock. And I was doing some teaching there on wayfinding. And in the back of the room, while I was teaching that night, was a young woman who came up to me afterwards and just with tears and just sobbing. And her name was Keahi, Eva. And Keahi grew up on Oahu. And she doesn't mind me telling the story because now we're co-facilitating together. Now we're guiding programs together, and have been to Hawaii together now as well, and spent time meeting more people from the community, family and friends that she knows and she grew up with. And she lives in Colorado, and incredible spiritual leader there. Yeah, and Kahi's experience was that here's this big white guy telling the story of her people, and she said doing it with such grace and dignity, and doing it actually authentically true to the culture in a way that re-acknowledged some of her own desire to reconnect more with her own culture, which she was questioning at that time. And so it's taken her over these years now, since that encounter, much more deeply into her own hula dance tradition, her ukulele. She gifted me her ukulele that was made by a very traditional ukulele maker on Oahu. And it's one of my treasures now, that I have this beautiful piece of koa wood shaped into an instrument, and I play it and think of Kahi often, and a gift. So here's what we know. I'll tell you now the big story. This is a remarkable story. So we know that as we understand more and more about migration and about genetics and a lot of the anthropological clues like pottery and different things, this is what we're beginning to uncover. And this is very recent, that knowing, in the scientific community, of course, it's there in the tradition, it's there in the song, it's there in the memory, but it was an unlearning of a lot of colonial blindness to be able to acknowledge it. But a group of people left Taiwan, the island of Taiwan, and they did something remarkable. They just sailed into the open ocean. They had no maps, they had no charts, they had no written language, no magnetic compass, no instruments, no satellites or Google. They had acquired a confidence slowly built up over generations that you could go into the open ocean with no landmarks for weeks at a time and still know exactly where you are. Even with currents, even with drift and leeway, even with storms, you could always be aware of where you are and never lose track. They also learned to hold a vision and to conjure up the next place and to keep doing this for 100 generations, which is exactly what they did. They found every inhabitable island in the Pacific Ocean. They found it in an area that's larger than Russia and China combined. It's one language group. It's the largest culture sphere on the planet by far. And they did it just with attentiveness. They did it just by being aware. Just by just by being aware, by being so so alive to the moment and to their own sensory experience that they could find land. And we know that these were intentional journeys with their families, with their breadfruits and their animals. It wasn't accidental, and it wasn't just a bunch of young people jumping in a boat and taking off somewhere. These were now we still don't know a lot. We don't know how they found. If you look at this triangle that has Tahiti at the center of it, we don't know how they found Rapa Nui to the southeast. We don't know how they found New Zealand to the southwest, and we certainly don't know how they found the Hawaiian Islands to the north. There's no theories around this. They're too far apart, and it's not migration. It's not, there's no explanations. Something like Rapa Nui is mind-boggling because there's sort of nothing really too much between Tahiti and Rapa Nui, and then there's nothing beyond Rapa Nui for months of sailing. So you need to survive to get there, but you don't even know it's there before you go. So yeah, it's incredible. It's an incredible story. The Hawaiian Islands, you have to sail north through the doldrums, this area just north of the equator where there's very little wind and it's very unpredictable. And there's a giant conveyor belt of current that goes the opposite direction. And the trade winds are completely lost. And they didn't know Hawaii was there. And if you miss Hawaii, there's nothing. If you miss Hawaii, you're dead. So they were sailing to an island they didn't know existed that would have been a death if they hadn't hit it, but they found it. And the tradition, but not just the tradition, the lived experience is that you have a vision. It's a gift that is given to you, and you know exactly where you're going because you've got this vision and you know what bearing it's on. And you also sense your way to it. You start pick it up, and it's like that old game as you play as a kid of hot and cold, hot, hotter, hotter, colder, colder, hotter. That's how you're sensing your way towards this island. So a couple of the practices are based on actually perception. So if we don't understand the perception, we won't understand the practice. The boat doesn't move in traditional navigation. Kaimana was very clear with me on this. The boat is not moving. The boat is the needle of the universal compass. So the compass, you're in the compass, and you are the needle. You're the still point. It is all moving around you. And it's far too complex if you're moving and everything is stationary. So the islands are moving in traditional navigation. The islands are on the move. The boat is the one reliable, consistent place where you're actually standing on the deck. And from that place, then, you hold a tether to where you've left that you never break. So if anything goes wrong, anything happens, you can get home. So you're connected to home. And that is just the simple direction and distance, how many sailing days and where home is located. But every minute you're updating that awareness. That is never, ever broken. Even in the wee hours of the night where you're half awake, half asleep, you're aware of home. And at the same time, you're aware and sensing the island, the land that you're going towards, and it's held as a vision. And then what you do is you conjure up the island and you bring it to you. You manifest it. And then all of a sudden it appears on the horizon, and there it is. And then you bring the island to you. You never leave the deck. There's no bird's eye perspective. When the Europeans encountered the Polynesians, they wanted them to help them draw maps because they knew where all the islands were, these navigators. And it took a while before they understood what the Europeans wanted. And they could do it. So it's not like they didn't have the ability. And once they figured out, oh yeah, I can show you where the islands are. Oh yeah, okay. And there's these wonderful maps that were drawn by a navigator named Tupaya that Cook picked up in Tahiti and sailed with them all the way to Indonesia. And he found all the islands along the way and led Cook to all the different islands, took Cook to New Zealand. He'd never been there, but he knew where it was. And he could sing. And this is the other thing too, is that this is all sung. It was a sung tradition. You sing yourself in the ocean, you sing yourself to the next, you chant and sing all night. You chant the stars as they move, you chant the feel of the island that's coming. This is all sung. And then yeah, and then as you're sort of aware of this vision, you're also, this is really important. It's not a mental vision, it's embodied, and it's in the rhythm pattern of the ocean itself. The dance of the boat is merged with the tether to home and merged with the vision of the island you're conjuring. And so you feel your way, and that's why you can sail even at nighttime when there's no stars and it's a cloudy night, or during the daytime in the fog. Doesn't matter, because you've embodied who you are, where you're going, where you've been from. It's all there in this movement that you've kinetically merged into. Now all of this thinking and the body is all one. That's it. That's it. It's that's and we know a wonderful thing about this is that this is not mysticism. This is not a mythic tale. This is a real human story, because this community were there on these islands, living their life, building these boats. And yeah, the centuries now of the story is brutal and horrific as disease, and as the European civilization comes in and it forbids them to wayfind, to voyage, dominates the culture, tries to destroy the traditional knowledge, the stories, the language. And yet, this wonderful perennial root is still intact and grows again. And that's what's happening now all over the Pacific. There are new catamarans being built, new vacas being built, going out sailing. There's hundreds of these boats now. All the islands, either Samoa or Tonga or Fiji or Tahiti or New Zealand, this is going on. Incredible stories that are coming up all over the place, and what people are learning. And yeah, it's hopeful. It's hopeful. Okay. So I'm going to stop the share there, and we can turn the recording off.